Well, it's one of the biggest games of the weekend. Texas A&M hosting Notre Dame. So who better to get on the show than Billy Liucci from TexAgs. Billy, thank you so much for making the time.
Always, Mike. You know that. Where's Shane at today?
I think he's at Cracker Barrel right now. If I'm being honest, he's fueling up for tonight's show.
Hey, nothing that a few biscuits can't. Hopefully, he's not listening to Nuno's advice, and he's on. Like me, I'd go in there and get some chicken and dumplings from Cracker Barrel to kind of set the tone for the season.
Yeah. So, hey, a little backstory. I don't think David will mind me sharing this, but so he reached out to Shane about a year ago and said, "Hey, let me help you try to get into shape here." And cousin Shane was all about it. And then apparently they had a phone call, and he said, "Man, as soon as he mentioned egg whites, he knew." Shane said, "I was out."
Like, I'll do the egg. Like, I'm with you right up until you said white. You told me I had to eat 100 eggs a week. I'm getting whites. I get on there. He's the king of unsolicited health and fitness advice. So I was on him about that. When Shane brought it up on air at SEC Media Days, I'm like, what are you doing? And Hugo claims that Shane asked, but it was really not an ask, but he interpreted it as an ask. He felt like Shane was putting out the signal, hey, whoever's willing to help me out here to get me on this path, and Nuno just inserted himself. He's the best.
Yeah, well, that's the most Shane thing ever. But hey, I really wanted to ask you, because no one's got a better pulse on A&M than you, but this feels like the most unpredictable team that I can ever remember coming out of College Station. Do you feel that way as well?
I really do. I feel like the floor ceiling of this thing is so wild. And I feel like the floor to them as a football team is not very low. I think with Mike Elko, Colin Klein, and this staff, and what Tommy Moffitt's meant for the offseason and kind of the culture, I don't think it's a low floor in terms of what they're going to put on the field. But I think if they're at around that floor, then so many of these games are toss-up football games for year one. I think their ceiling is really high. I think, and I'm not saying they get in there, but I think their ceiling is like playoff high. Again, we're talking ceiling. I think their ceiling is you're 9-2 going into the Texas game with a chance to, get into that field. Again, this is what happens when you and I get on here. The world of getting misquoted. That's their, if everything goes right, their potential. They'd have to win a lot of close games. And I think there's going to be about at least five, a handful of these games that come down to a final possession or two. And I think Saturday night's going to be one of those games. How A&M does in those closing moments of games will be telling. But here's what's interesting. Mike, is 4 of probably their 5 toughest games are at Kyle Field. Maybe their 4 toughest. Auburn in November is going to have a say in that, and I think Florida in a couple weeks will have a say in that, because it's either going to be a sky-high Gator team that beat Miami, or it's going to be truly back against the wall for Napier, because if he goes 0-2 against Miami and then A&M at home, and both of them at home, I think that tenure might be done. And I think Florida's better than that. I don't think they're going to be world beaters, but I think that's an underrated football team because everyone's focusing on the pressure. So my point of all that saying is most of their toughest games are at home. I'm not sure on a neutral field if you put Texas A&M versus whoever they're playing, not neutral, but LSU's coming in here. Missouri's coming in here. Texas coming in here. Notre Dame's coming in here Saturday. This is a massive home field advantage at this place, as you and most people around the SEC know. When A&M's a solid top 20 football team, you better come in here as a national title contender, an SEC champion contender, to get out of here with a win. And before you make the App State joke, understand that Jimbo, who didn't get it where it needed to be here and was ultimately fired, I think in each of the last 4 seasons or 4 of the last 5, he beat a top 10 team at home. So to get your toughest games at home, I think they're going to be really well coached under Mike Elko. And just go look at what Elko did in year 1 at Duke. And by the start of year 2, he's beaten Clemson at Duke. And he's taken Notre Dame to essentially what they need, a 4th and 18 to win that game with Riley Leonard hurt. So there's a lot of opportunity for the Aggies. I think their talent level is not I don't think it's top 3 in the SEC, but it could be. I think there's a world you could look and say it's top 5 or 6, upper echelon talent level in the SEC. And I think they did a great job through the portal.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you said that because I did want to ask you about Mike Elko, who I think even the biggest A&M fan would not rank Mike Elko today as a top 5 coach in the SEC, just because he's only had 2 years as being a head coach, and he did a hell of a job at Duke. But if they do reach that ceiling, let's say they win 9 games and they make the playoff, or maybe more realistically 10 games and make the college football playoff, I think that would certainly cement Mike Elko as a top 5 coach in this league, because quite frankly, I think there is with Nick Saban leaving and just a massive turnover in this.
Yeah.
There are good coaches in this conference, but I don't know how many elite are. I think it's fair to say if A&M makes the playoffs in year 1, Elko's a top 5 coach in the SEC. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, if they did that. And I think even like you said, if they go 9-3 on this schedule in year 1, I think that's a hell of a coaching job. I mean, I think that would be an incredible coaching job. And then if you looked at what he did at Duke in those 2 years and you combine it with year 1 at A&M, you go, okay, this is his 3-year body of work. And if you're here in Aggie Land, you got to feel really good. I feel really good as it is today, just watching him. I'm out there watching practice, watching him coach, but I'm watching him interact with his players. I'm watching his other coaches interact and coach and motivate. I'm watching in the offseason what that expectation level is. I saw how he navigated the portal, how he's dealing with NIL and that space and roster retention and recruiting and everything about it. You're going, okay, he not only gets it, he just, he's understated, but man, that is a passionate dude about football, about the job, about his players, obviously his family, but just he's a ball coach too. I think people forget, you mentioned 2 years as a head coach. He's 47 years old. He's actually a pretty young head coach to be. I think he was younger than Kevin Sumlin was when he took the job. He's younger than Jimbo was when he took the job. Obviously, Mike Sherman and Fran, probably the youngest coach to take this A&M job since maybe going all the way back to R.C. Slocum. I don't know how old R.C. was when he took over, when Jackie Sherrill left, but he's really young. And I think just from staying in touch with him, Mike, when he was at Duke, just really impressed with kind of his vision and where he saw college football going. And I think, this was indeed the dream job for him. This isn't a coach that's going to be looking elsewhere or trying to leverage other jobs to get more money from here. This is a coach that I think this was like the destination job for him. And I think while he was at Duke, he was coaching Duke, and this would have been applicable there too. But he's just looking at college football and where it was heading, and he had a lot of foresight into what it was going to take to be a head coach in 2024 and in the next few years. And that to me was particularly impressive. And I think that's what stood out about him, throughout that search process. I'm glad things went the way they did. Kentucky can be happy with Mark Stoops, and that's fine. And they should be, but with what he's done while he's there, but this worked out absolutely, I think, the best for Texas A&M.
Well, do you think Saturday night is the biggest home opener for A&M since they debuted in the SEC with that Florida game? Because I went down the list of, there's not many candidates. I mean, 2014, but that was at South Carolina. That was the first SEC Network game. There's a couple of UCLA games, but this feels a lot bigger than those games.
This feels a lot bigger, and I'm with you. There's that Florida game, and you're talking about home opener. I don't even know what the home openers have been over there. I think, but opener, season opener, like build up. I think over the years, and I go all the way back, like they opened up against Chris Winkie and Peter Warwick in Florida State in the Meadowlands years ago. You had guys like Dan Campbell, Dante Hall playing on that football team. So that's how long ago that was. I might have said Charlie Ward. It was Peter Warwick, Chris Winkie, that Florida State team that played for the national title that year, lost to T. Martin in Tennessee. Had a baby cousin Shane probably in tears, his diaper crying, celebrating that ball's national title. But honestly, since then, I think it's been the 2012 Florida game, and this would probably be second in all those years because it's Notre Dame. It's a top 10 Notre Dame team. Notre Dame came in here back in like 2000 or 2001. They weren't very good. This is a highly ranked, some believe, playoff Notre Dame team. Regardless, this is a massive game for the Irish, right? When you look at the rest of their schedule, this is a huge game for them to come on the road to Kyle Field. If they could get a win, what does that do for their playoff chances? For Texas A&M, it's game one under Mike Elko. It's Notre Dame. It's a lot of question marks on this A&M team, but also a ton of potential. I feel like a lot of people around the country are waiting to see what both of these teams look like. I mean, I believe it to be the most intriguing game in college football this weekend and maybe the most pivotal. If Georgia beats Clemson, Clemson still has a pretty clear path on how to get there, right? A&M Notre Dame, it's like if Notre Dame wins this game, you can already kind of look at them and go, man, they're going to have a hard time getting knocked out of this playoff field. If A&M wins, you start looking at A&M's schedule these next few weeks. Okay, Florida, they might go into that one now, a slight favorite. The next big game they're playing in terms of exposure is Missouri coming to Kyle Field. Like you start looking at that, I think the team differently, particularly if it's an impressive win either way. Like Riley Leonard or Conner Weigman both have the potential to kind of be the talk of the college football weekend on Sunday. Maybe that's either the quarterbacks, USC or LSU are going to put on the field. I feel like that's kind of similar in what's going to happen in Vegas. But if either Conner Weigman or Riley Leonard show out against they're both playing, I think, really good defenses. In particular, like outstanding defensive fronts. The Aggies and the Fighting Irish. If either of these QBs show out and kind of are the MVP of their team Saturday night, I really do believe they're the talk of college football. But they're the most talked about QB in the country coming out of week one because I think they both have so much to gain with a big game. And if Riley Leonard does it and looks good against the D-line with all these NFL guys and a Mike Elko coach defense, you start going, what kind of numbers is he going to put up in South Bend this year under Mike Denbrock? If Conner Weigman does it, Mike, we're sitting here going like this. That's the guy we saw at the beginning of last year. That's the guy we saw beat LSU and almost outduel Jackson Dart and Ole Miss as a freshman. Had he not got hurt this last year, we'd have been talking about him, Ewers, and Dart as the first team All-SEC quarterback. And so if he goes out and has a game against that Notre Dame defense, then that's the conversation surrounding number 15.
Will there be any hesitation to run Weigman if they have to in this game? Because I know Colin Klein loves to run the quarterback in certain spots. Will there be any hesitation there, do you think?
I don't think so. And, you know, it's interesting. Somebody asked me the other day, they've got a couple other quarterbacks that can really run, and Jalen Henderson and Marcel Reed, and they said, would you envision any switching out just to implement some QB run game? I don't think so. I guess it's not off the table, but I wouldn't think so. And Conner can really run. I watched him all through high school. It's more of that, and I'm not saying he's Mahomes, but it's more of that Mahomes running style than, say, a Riley Leonard or going back A&M like a Johnny Manziel. It's not going to go hit the 60-yard touchdown run or make three guys miss. It's more subtle, and he kind of knows when he's going to take off, where he's trying to get, and he can run and get you first downs. You go back and watch Ole Miss. Go watch him against LSU at the end of his freshman year. Watch him against Miami in that losing effort last year. He'll run to get you what he needs, and he's really good at evading the pressure and stuff. But in that design run game, do I think you'd see a ton of it? No. Do I think they'll be scared to do it? No.
Any concern that A&M lacks explosive playmakers after losing Owens?
Yeah, I do. That was one of the things I talked about a lot when they lost Ruben, because I'm a big fan of Le'Veon Moss. And look, that's another thing. Le'Veon Moss in maroon and white and Jeremiah Love for Notre Dame. That was a guy that I think picked Notre Dame over A&M out of the St. Louis area. Those two dudes are really, really good running backs, I believe. I also think they'll both be kind of part of a committee, but either one of them could have a 100-yard game against a really good defense. So with that said, though, Ruben Owens was very explosive. And I think explosive weapons were what this defense has been, what this offense has been looking for and needing. Noah Thomas certainly has big play potential. I think before long, they'll end up getting Jabri Barber back. That's what they're really hopeful about. He's a transfer from Troy that's pretty electric and was really turning heads in spring. But, Terry Bussey's a guy that they've talked about that's had work on both sides of the ball, a 5-star. He's another one that I think maybe it's on special teams this week. He's a guy that's very explosive that I'd keep an eye on throughout the season because I think they've got a pretty good situation at corner, and he's been getting work on both sides. But they're looking, Mike, for that home run explosive threat. I think they've got some big play threats like Sloan. I keep saying Sloan. Noah Thomas down the field. Cyrus Allen, the Louisiana Tech transfer, and Moose Muhammad, when he's on, can go give you 100. You don't know when that is, but I do think in this game and at Florida, if I've got a concern offensively, it's like, where are the big plays going to come from? Who's going to scare the defense as the game goes on? And that's something I think Klein and Elko are going to kind of find out along with the rest of us in these first couple of big games.
Do you anticipate the Aggie offense or defense having a better showing on Saturday night?
I think this is a defensive game for both teams. I think both teams, barring either of these two quarterbacks just having themselves they're in the zone kind of game, these are two really good college football defenses. Notre Dame proved that last year. They've got an elite secondary. They've got, their defensive tackle position, I think, is as tough as A&M will see this year, at least on the inside. But Mike Elko is working with more than he did at any point in his tenure at A&M the last 4 years. Where 1 year he led the SEC in total defense. I think twice they were in the top 10. I think they led the country in run defense at one point along the way there. He's got NFL defensive linemen on the second team right now. Potential first rounder Nick Scorton. Shamar Turner turned down the NFL to come back. And then Shamar Stewart is a guy that NFL scouts and the agents and even a couple of GM types have been telling me with the right year, this is a guy that could soar up the draft boards. And that's just, it doesn't even count a bunch of dudes. Like they brought in the Big Ten's leading sacker, and they brought in the Max leading sacker in Cassius Howell to go with a D-line that was already featuring some NFL talent. They've got a really good linebacker in Torian York. I do think Notre Dame with a completely rebuilt offensive line might line up and say, hey, let's just try to run right at them and like test their manhood a little bit early on. Rather than let them finesse us and beat us with pass rush moves and put our quarterback. I could see them doing that and seeing how it works. I think this D-line versus a Notre Dame O-line with 6 career starts is a really rough matchup for Riley Leonard and the Irish. A&M offensive line has a lot to prove as well. They've been bad the last 2 years. They got a new position coach, a new scheme. Believe it or not, I think they'll try out there with about 100+ starts amongst the group. When you count at other schools as well, other Power 5 schools, a couple of transfers in there that might start. So the experience on the O-line goes to A&M side, but I think both these units have a lot to prove against really strong defensive front. So to me, this is like one of those 23-20, rock fight type football games where it's like, who's the most physical, who's going to run the ball the best, which set of quarterback and receivers are going to have those 3 or 4 big plays that kind of flip the game.
All right, moment of truth, Billy. Who you got? Who's going to win the game? Are the Aggies going to go 1-0 under Mike Elko?
I think A&M 23-20. I said it. And if that game was in South Bend, Mike, I think I'd go the other way. I think it's that competitive. I think it's that evenly matched. You've got 2 playmaking quarterbacks. I think you've got quality running backs. I think you've got receivers on both teams that need to show that, hey, these passing games are going to be explosive this year. And I think you got 2 potentially elite defenses. And it's at night. It's at Kyle Field. It's big time college football, and both teams are used to it. Notre Dame, they're used to this spotlight. Their players are. Texas A&M, you're playing in the SEC. You're used to that spotlight. So I don't think either team's going to flinch or wilt under the pressure, but I just think there's going to be a hell of a lot of good defense and D linemen winning a lot of battles and drives being killed. And I think it's going to be just like kind of a survival of the fittest. Let's see who can walk out of here on top, lock the gates. And I think, again, A&M with that home field advantage, with that defense, you know how it is, the defense playing up and feeding off that 12th man. And then the counter of that, which is that crowd and its pressure it's going to put on the inexperienced Irish O-line and Riley Leonard at QB. I think they're going to make it really tough on him. And that's just that little bit of difference that I think is going to have A&M at 1-0 and Notre Dame going back still with plenty to play for. We'll see, though. I think it's a coin flip type game, and I think it's a final possession type of thing. But I like the Aggies in this one at home.
All right, last thing for you, Billy. Really appreciate your time. If that happens, if A&M goes 1-0, what can I get you to give me a season record prediction for A&M?
It's funny you say that because I think if the Aggies go 1-0 in this one, if they beat Notre Dame, that's how I get this team to 9-3. That's my prediction there. I think Notre Dame win. To me, I'm looking at that Notre Dame in Florida, and I'm going, damn, if they were to pull both of those out, then I think we need to kind of really take a step back and reevaluate A&M as a playoff contender. I think that's a really tough order to win both those games. One at home, one in the swamp, your first road game, an opener in game 1 under a new head coach against a very experienced Notre Dame team. That's a much taller task than people think. And if A&M can pull that off, then you look at the rest of the schedule and you go, these teams, their toughest games are at home outside of that trip to Auburn. But I don't think A&M's at this type level, Mike, this year where you can overlook Arkansas and Dallas, South Carolina and Columbia at night, Florida and Auburn on the road, Mississippi State even on the road with Lebby and Blake Shapen and the Cowbell. All of those games are going to be dangerous for a football team like this. I think they beat Notre Dame. I think they navigated enough to go 9-3 and have one of those. They're one of those teams that you go, man, Mike Elko did an incredible job, and they're really going to be one to watch moving forward.
All right, thank you so much, Billy. I really, really, really appreciate it. And I've already let my audience know, but I'll let them know again here that I'm going to be joining TexAgs weekly during the football season. But I can't tell you how excited I am to do that.
Hey, did you and I just make it through a whole segment without stirring up the fans down in Austin?
I mean, feel free to go ahead and say whatever you want about them, but
I mean, I think we kind of made it. We'll save it for next week. I think Texas. We'll wait and see how they do up at Michigan. I think they should go win that game. If they don't, then I think that's a team you reevaluate significantly in terms of if they don't go win against that team that lost like 18 starters and Jim Harbaugh and has all that other stuff going on.
Right.
Well,
I've not caught the Texas fever. I don't buy the bullshit coming out of Austin. So I would not even be surprised if they lost that game, quite honestly.
To me, I think I've got them. I'm looking at them as a potential like 10-2, with floor being 8-4, and nobody. I think their ceiling's higher, but I think I'm gonna pick them at 10-2. But like, they played a lot of close games in the Big 12 last year. I know they went and beat Bama. That's more than A&M did. That's more than anyone in the SEC did. They lost they lost a couple, but they won a lot of close football games against far inferior opponents, not playing in the toughest of environments, not having to do it week in and week out and week in and week out. And I'm sold that they're good. I'm sold that they're pretty damn good. I'm not sold that they're elite and great. Ricky Williams said something the other day. I don't know how many times I've agreed or disagreed with Ricky, but I read where he said something like, I'm to the BA and back. I need to see the CK before I'm all the way. That's kind of how I feel with them. I'm like, okay, definitely improved. Some real high-end, top-tier talent. They lost a lot, Mike. They lost a lot of exceptional players that were playing against teams with a lot less to work with than they were. And they played a lot of close games and lost a couple against, I think, teams with a lot less to work with than they had, and they lost a lot. So we'll see.
Yeah, and I think Florida State just showed us you can't just plug and play these transfers. As much as fans want to assume you can, you just can't do it.
Yep, no doubt. I think they'll be a fun one to watch this year as well. And everybody's writing off OU. I've kind of been down on OU. But the more I look at their schedule, they got a lot of toss-ups too. A&M, Tennessee, OU, and LSU. Okay, Conner Weigman, Nico, Jackson Arnold, Garrett Nussmeier. Who of those four quarterbacks ascends? At the end of the year, forget stats. When we look at those dudes and go, okay, if one of them, and you can say if everyone can agree, that dude was the best of those four, it ain't no question. If that ends up being how it goes, if one of those four is clearly better, watch that team make the college football playoff. I think one of those four comes out of the SEC and reaches the playoff this year, and it's going to be whoever has the best quarterback.
Yeah. No, I can't wait for, man. I'm so done talking about it. I want to see it, and we're going to get it here in just a couple days.
All right, buddy. We'll talk to you this week.